I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. This month, as Christmas draws near, join me on a journey called Advent. Constant Wonder will mark this venerable tradition, a calendar of hopeful anticipation, with daily short episodes. A new Advent experience every day all the way through the 25th. Together with special guests, we'll seek out the wonder and awe felt by so many people during this season of hope, reverence, peace, and goodwill. It's December 1st. We're going to open our series with Sine, a physician, gardener, and writer who has put her own twist on marking and celebrating the season of Advent. What she does during Advent is inspired, plant-inspired. Not everyone has a green thumb to match Christine's. No worries. Her practice of planting a themed indoor garden for Advent is such a refreshing angle. I expect that as you hear her describe her own unique approach, her personal tradition, you'll almost certainly imagine your own ways of helping this centuries-old observance really come alive.
I think that every year I look forward to Advent because it usually opens for me new things about the story of Jesus. I like to ignore, in some ways, the traditional ways of looking at the season and ask God, what is it, God, that you want to speak to me about during this season? How do you want me to look afresh at this wonderful season that is really at the center of our faith, and to explore the things that can open up new perspectives of the story that I have never noticed before.
Christine used to mark Advent in a manner that is hardly unaccustomed to us, with a wreath. But about 10 years ago, wreath making for her gave way to something else altogether.
I get bored easily, I must say. But also, it wasn't just that I was bored. It was that I was feeling that, in a way, I was stagnating because I was using something that, even though I loved it, it didn't really have any ongoing kind of meaning for me. So I decided to experiment. And particularly, I'm a very keen gardener. So I decided that the best thing to experiment with was creating an Advent garden. This was pretty easy for me because I've got plants all over the house and some of them needed a fresh home. So I got a large bowl and I planted different plants in it. I put candles in it for each week of Advent.
Advent is, of course, celebrated broadly and in so many different ways. For many Christians, each week unfolds with its own theme, starting the last Sunday of November with hope, then progressing through each week until Christmas, hope, peace, joy, love. Christine wanted to make each week more personal for herself.
And then I decided I would choose my own themes for each week. And so I took some stones, and they're pretty rough because I'm not an artist, but I wrote my theme for each week on the stone. And that became a fantastic focus for me during that time of Advent. And it just brought Advent alive for me in ways that it hadn't been alive for quite a while. So it became a new practice for me. Now, I must confess, after 10 years, I'm starting to think maybe I need something else because it's starting to get a little old, though I can do something different every year, which has been part of the delight of using this practice because it encourages me to really think about Advent and the coming of Jesus before the season begins. And I spend time dreaming about what would I like to focus on this year. And then I incorporate that into the garden that I have that sits on my desk and that can remind me not just when I'm having a reflection time, a devotional time, but throughout the day, it can remind me about what the season is about as well.
These themes, like patience and prayer, have played a significant role in Christine's bowl of living decorations. This practice has solidified her focus, but with a versatility that allows her to adjust and reconsider her personal themes. It's hardly a static, unchanging experience from one December to the next.
I think probably my favorite theme for Advent was one year I used I Choose Joy as my theme. Basically, what I did was I wrote on my rocks the things that I look forward to that give me joy. And so I can't remember all of them, but I had joy and I had love and I had hospitality and generosity. I mean, these are some of the things I think, particularly during the Advent season, that give me joy. And so I wrote those on the different rocks and chose one to focus on during each week of Advent.
So many of us find comfort in the familiar, and that means tradition, and sometimes traditions are formulaic. It sounds to me like you're moving the other way from formula, that you're reinventing and doing something practically idiosyncratic.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I love tradition. Otherwise, I wouldn't be practicing Advent. But I feel that sometimes the traditions can, particularly in relation to our faith, that they can steal the wonder of the story from us. You know, I think that the story of Jesus coming into our world is a wondrous story. And I think part of what I've found through doing something that particularly appeals to me, that I have reconnected to that wonder at every stage. And it's revitalized my faith in many ways. And I'm not saying to people, go out and make an Advent garden, but I would say find something that really connects to you at this season and see how you can reinvent it in a way that will really heighten the wonder of the season for you.
I expect a few people hearing you talk might be a little surprised to think of any connection between gardens and the cold season of year, at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. A garden, when you said garden, I was thinking outdoors, but I suppose where you are in Seattle, it's kind of cold and wet during the Christmas time.
Yes, this is an indoor garden. I can imagine that in some parts of the world, you know, establishing an outdoor garden for Advent would be lovely. But here in Seattle, it's definitely got to be an indoor garden and something that I don't have to put on a heavy coat to go out and enjoy too.
Explain to me, if you would, the connection, if any, that you find between gardening and the Christmas story. That's not one of the standard sort of images that comes our way, gardens and Christmas?
Well, particularly I think last year I was thinking about this in terms of the connections, because I think one of the things that we forget is that the whole Advent story took place in the middle of nature. It wasn't a big urban centre where Christ was born. It was a tiny little village. And so there was constant interaction with nature. I mean, we tend to think of the animals that were involved, but, you know, I think nature was involved in so many different ways, not just gardening as domesticated kind of gardening, but wild gardening. There was the wild garden of God that was in many ways intricately involved with the Advent story. I think of those shepherds out in the fields, and I think of them looking up at the sky. I was thinking the other day, you know, it's not surprising that the angels came to the shepherds, because they were some of the few people that were probably sitting there in awe and wonder of the beauty of the cosmos. And so I think they were already primed in some ways, waiting for the coming of the angels that would announce the Christ child to them.
Your gardening is a kind of listening at Advent time.
Definitely, yes. I think that Advent is meant to be a season of listening. It's not just the birth of Jesus that I think we're looking ahead to, but we are looking ahead to new things that God wants to give birth to. I mean, that's part of what I love about the seasons in the garden, is that we have seasons when we plant and we have seasons when things grow and when literally they are birthed as they break through the soil and they start to gain new life. It's a time of listening to the new things, listening to even what should we be planting at this time? What should we be hoping for that God might want to give birth to?
I really like this idea of being open during the season of Advent to whatever it may be that God has in store for us individually. So I'm wondering, I guess I'm wondering if you have ever learned through this kind of sacred listening. Have you learned something new about the Christmas story or about the birth of Jesus? Something you were able to hear for the first time, maybe because you weren't just waiting, but truly attentive and ready to hear it.
I remember one year learning about the vulnerability of God. It wasn't something I'd really thought about before, but God comes to us as a vulnerable God. Vulnerable in terms of being born into this world as a human being. As a physician, I know that particularly back 2,000 years ago, birth was a time of great vulnerability. And for God to come in that way is absolutely amazing. And I look at that, and I've thought a lot since that kind of revelation came to me one year during the Advent season. And I've thought, yeah, God is vulnerable in so many other ways as well. God is vulnerable to us rejecting God. God is vulnerable to us going along the wrong path. There are all kinds of ways in which God continues to be vulnerable in this world. God is vulnerable to us not listening and to us not kind of grabbing hold of who God really is. So it was a very important revelation for me.
Thanks for joining us for Day 1 of Advent here on Constant Wonder. Our guest in this episode has been Christine Sine, author of The Gift of Wonder, Creative Practices for Delighting in God. We're going to be hearing once again from her later in our series, which will extend all the way from now through Christmas Day. Be sure to share Constant Wonder, and especially our Advent series, maybe with a friend or loved one, somebody who may be looking for a way to infuse their holiday season with deeper meaning. As always, you can find Constant Wonder, including this special series, on byuradio.org/constantwonder, or you can get us from Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode was produced by Jess Scoville and Mamie Teeples, with help from Lily Jensen and Tenery Taylor. I'm Marcus Smith. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.